And I remember like getting like the palest pink shirt I could find, button up shirt, and like the longest knee length skirt I had, and like pearls, and like holding my hair back. And I just was so uncomfortable there because I didn't fit into this crowd. And it was because I was trying to fit into what I thought or what I was told a lawyer should be and look like.
All right, welcome to the Path Distilled. I'm your host, Kevin Harris. My co-host is Lauren Tashman.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show today. We're really excited to have our guest today, Alycia Powell. She's the co-founder of Champions for Philanthropy. Alycia, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Alycia, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Alycia Powell, co-founder of Champions for Philanthropy. Champions for Philanthropy is an organization, consulting agency that was founded in 2017 by my co-founder and myself, my co-founder, Michelle Mays. We work with professional athletes in the charitable space. So everything from helping them start up their nonprofit foundations to managing their foundations, as well as helping them create strategic partnerships with existing nonprofits and helping them with their charitable initiatives. So anything in the charitable space with professional athletes, that's what we do at Champions for Philanthropy.
Sounds like a fun job. We're certainly interested in hearing more about that. But why don't you wind back to the beginning and tell us kind of the origin of your starting place? How did you get into sports or get into kind of this line of work that you're in?
Yeah, so from as long as I can remember, I wanted to be an attorney. That was my goal. I remember doing a presentation in fifth grade to younger children about what it meant to be an attorney, and doing all this research, and doing research back then and involved encyclopedias. So it was
And going
definitely
to
a
a
bigger.
library,
Yes,
yeah.
it wasn't as easy as it is now. So that was my passion. I ended up going to uh, law school and decided while I was in law school that I didn't want to practice law, but I was already there. I was a year and a half in, and I had a conversation with my mom. And I told her how I just really felt like quitting. I just didn't, I just wasn't passionate about being a lawyer. So why stay in law school? My mom, being the ever so practical voice of reason, said, well, you already have the student loans for 2 years, so you may as well finish and at least, have the degree, whether you use it or not. So I'm really glad I listened, because even though, it was tough being in law school, knowing that my end game was different than everyone else's. Everyone else was, they're planning for internships and summer associate positions and thinking about what life after graduation would mean, and preparing for the bar. And for me, it was kind of like, I need to figure out what my path was going to be because I know it's not to be an attorney. While I was in law school, I was very involved with lots of different activities, including founding the Sports Law Society at our school. We had a sports and entertainment and media law group when I first started that I was involved in, and it sort of dissipated. And I didn't want the sports piece to die. I wanted it to be more of a focus because the law school that I went to was in New York City. And I'm like, we have the leagues here, we have the players associations here, we have so many teams based out of New York. Like, this is the perfect spot to focus on sports law and the business of sports. So started the Sports Law Society, and it was a huge success, and also started the Sports Law Symposium. Um, the idea was to bring together people from the sports business, sports lawyers, and other sports folks, and for a day of conversation. So bringing together lawyers and law students, focusing on all things sports law. So they still hold the Sports Law Symposium to this day, which I'm really proud of. That it continued way after I left. But the passion for sports was always there. My hope was to be an agent. That was my goal initially, when I decided that I wasn't going to be an attorney. And I listened to people who explain all the reasons why I wouldn't make it as an agent. So instead of like, digging my heels in and saying, I can make this work, I said, well, maybe they're right. So I explored other paths to work in the sports industry. So after I graduated, I started doing business and nonprofit consulting, and simultaneously in the background started a lifestyle management company for professional athletes because it was something I was passionate about, and I thought it made sense. And it did. It was a great business model if I had clients. So I didn't. So it took a while for me to get back into sports afterwards.
Wind us back to the beginning. I'm curious about this initial interest in law. What was it when you were that young? Like, was there a particular, moment or something you saw? Like, what drew you to that field of work?
To be honest, there were a few different things. One of the major things, I knew I wanted to be successful, and that was the only thing that I could see that was like successful. So I said, "Oh, well, I'll be a lawyer," And even as a kid, I loved to argue, and I always had something to say, and I always felt the need to fight about like what I believed in and what I was passionate about. My mom didn't love that. No, my family didn't love that much because I constantly had stuff to say. So I felt like that would be a good profession from what I could see, like that would be a great profession for me because I could say everything I wanted to say and no one would stop me.
And so it sounds like you stayed on the path, of course, through fruition. If you're comfortable talking about it, what was it that you started turning you off to the field?
So, before I went to law school, I took some time off between undergrad and law school, and I worked at an attorney's office, and I, loved the attorneys that I worked with. But I didn't love the life of an attorney. Like I didn't, and granted I was young, but I just didn't feel like that was something that I would want to do day in and day out. But I said, wait, this is your plan. Like, this is your goal. Just go to law school. And, maybe it's just this type of law. Like, maybe you'll find another part of law that you're passionate about. So I had a laser focus, first year you had to take certain classes that everyone had to take. But then as soon as I could, I started taking summer classes right after my first year. As soon as I could, I kind of tailored my classes to fit my interests. And even though I was interested in the subject, I still wasn't passionate about it. Like I was interested, and it wasn't as boring as some of the other law that I had dealt with. But I said, can I see myself doing this day in and day out? And I couldn't. And I still can do. I feel like if you're a practicing attorney, you should be passionate about it because you have either someone's life in your hands or someone's business or someone's financial interest. Like you have very important things that you have to deal with as an attorney. And I just felt like my skill set was better suited doing something else, something that I was more passionate about.
So I've often told up and coming grad students, for me at least, and I've heard others say this, usually the PhD programs that we enter are 5 years. And for most people I've spoken with, the third year is the hardest, in part because you've already done the 2 years and you still have the 2 years in front of you once you finish the third year. You mentioned earlier that you had kind of felt your doubts starting after you'd already put in some time. How did you start navigating through those feelings and thoughts? Was it a gradual process, or did you shift pretty immediately to the new plan?
The funny part, so with law school, it being a 3-year program, the most intense part is the first year. That's the year that they weed people out, the first semester actually. So like a lot of people that I started law school with left or had to leave after the first semester. So they really just throw you into it. So it's like after the first year, after really the first semester, it's better, but especially after the first year, for most people, it's like smooth sailing because you get to choose what classes you want. You can focus on whatever you want, and it's like a hazing process, really. Like they haze you the first year. I don't think they don't market it that way, but now that I think about it, that's exactly what it is. And it's like, okay, like only the strong survive. Or, people who say like, no, this is what I really want. Like, I'm going to stick with it. I was stubborn in saying like, at first, even after, so the first year was extremely difficult. So then by the year and a half when I'm into it, I decided that I just don't like this. I don't like the culture here. Like, law school culture is very competitive, and I don't mind competitiveness, but I just didn't like the I just didn't like. I'm not a fan of lawyers. I love the lawyers that I love, but I just there are some really really great lawyers that I love to this day, but like when you put them all together in the same space, it just is not a great environment all the time.
Sure.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I was just reading something this morning that was talking about, belonging and how we're always, right, as humans, we're always striving to see that whether we belong or not, and do we connect? And if it is a group that we really do want to be a part of, but we don't feel like we belong, what do we do then, right? Versus maybe the opposite, what you're talking about now is you kind of recognize that it wasn't a group that you wanted to belong to. So now what do you do that you've invested this time in?
Right. And it's a group that I respect. I respect lawyers so much. I respect the time that they put in, and the effort and what they do. They really change the world. But like you mentioned about like the belonging, I remember sitting with an advisor in law school and explaining how I was kind of like how I was feeling like I wasn't actually fitting in when I would go in. And he's like, well, part of it is you need to change. Like, you're a little too much, like you need to tone it down a little bit. And he explained that I just basically wasn't demure enough. So I remember leaving and I had an event that night to go to, and it was an entertainment and sports law mixer with other industries as well. And I remember like getting like the palest pink shirt I could find, button up shirt, and like the longest knee length skirt I had, and like pearls, and like pulled my hair back. And I just was so uncomfortable there because I didn't fit into this crowd. And it was because I was trying to fit into what I thought or what I was told a lawyer should be and look like. And it wasn't me. And it showed because I couldn't talk to anyone because I just didn't feel like, and this was a group of lawyers and non-lawyers. So they were also looking at me like, what library did you just come from? So I think that was like really a turning point for me to say like, I mean, I know a lot of really fabulous lawyers who show up as themselves all the time. And that's fine, but they're also like not it's just not the normal culture,
Yes,
like they stand out. And I just that just wasn't for me.
It's interesting because you said, you were initially drawn to it, right? Because you had something to say and you wanted to kind of have your say. And so that must have been hard to get that feedback of, kind of almost like it sounds the way I was, listening to it as you're talking, like it was like stamping out that fire in you.
Yeah, it did. So I had to say, I mean, as a kid, I didn't know what else was out there. So, I knew at a certain point that I wanted to make a lot of money. And then I found out in law school that the majority of lawyers don't actually make a lot of money. They have a lot of loans. And, unless you get a corporate job where you're working, so, a million hours a week, you actually don't make that much money. So I said, okay, wait. So that's one thing that I thought I was going to have. I had this idea of like a corner office, a beautiful office, and being able to dress up and go to work. Like it seems so, I was a kid, but for me, that was like, I was like, great, I could do all those things as a lawyer. And I found out, wait, there's lots of other jobs where you can have a nice office and make more money than, lawyers with less debt. But I didn't think about that beforehand, before I got the debt.
And so it sounds like conversations with your mother helped keep you there at some level. And then you mentioned that people were telling you why it was a bad idea or why you wouldn't be successful as a sports agent. Could you talk a little bit about what they were telling you?
Yeah, the sports industry in general, it's a very male-dominated industry. That's just the fact. There is definitely since the time that I graduated to now, there's definitely a lot more. Women are a lot more visible in the sports industry, and the sports industry is definitely making strides in terms of making sure women are, women are in power and women are shown in the whether it be in the leagues, agencies, or whatever. But regardless, still to this day, there are not many women agents, and there are registered women agents, but they're not actually working with players. So even though there have been so many strides made in the sports industry in general, agents for whatever reason, I listened to a podcast recently, and there's just a lot of reasons why men don't feel comfortable signing with women. According to this female agent, the tide is changing a little bit more. Like guys are realizing that, as long as women can do the work, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if it's a male or a female. But at the time, this is over 10 years ago now, it just, it was kind of, it was not as popular. And they said it's just probably not going to happen unless you have someone who you can bring to a large agency. There's no way a large agency is going to hire you. And if you want to go out on your own, it's very expensive. There's a lot. So unless you're independently wealthy, you won't be able to start your own agency. So I'm not independently wealthy. So, so I said, okay, well, perhaps this is not the right thing for me.
And so were the seeds of philanthropy already there? Or what happens
Yes.
next?
So growing up, giving back was something that was always really important to my family, and then to me. It's funny, my parents, my mom and my stepdad they were so charitable. They were so charitable to the point that as a spoiled teenager, I was like, you guys give too much. Like, stop helping people. I remember telling them that one time because like there was always something that they were doing or helping or giving someone a ride here or picking someone up. And I'm just like, guys, like, give it a break. But they instilled that in me, and it was just something that we did, as a family. It was something that just was part of who I was. So, and in middle school, I volunteered. In high school, I volunteered. In college, I volunteered, involved in different community organizations. So in law school, your time is limited. You're focused on what you're focused on, but I still was able to incorporate it into some of the groups that I was a part of. My second year of law school, I was the president of the Black Law Students Association. So I was able to take the position there and give back. We had programs where we had educational programs. We had programs where we partnered with high school students and brought them to the law school to show them other lawyers that look like them or law students that look like them, to show them this is a viable path for them. So I was still able to incorporate giving back. Was the co-chair of our school's auction, so I was able to help raise money for scholarships at our law school. So philanthropy was always something that I was still able to do in the background. So a few years after law school, I was serving on the board of a nonprofit that worked with youth and with student athletes, but teaching them life skills and using sports as a way to help them with educational aspects. It's a national nonprofit, and they work a lot with different teams and leagues. So I was able to be in kind of back in the sports mix there. And my business partner, they had an opening for the board, and I recommended my business partner. So we were on the board together and left around the same time and said, you know what, we both got our graduate degrees focusing on law. She received her MBA focusing on sports marketing and management. And we're both not working in the sports industry. Like, let's start something. Like, we're at a point where we're too old to get hired. We're not entry level anymore. So that's not going to work. And we haven't had a traditional sports path. So we're not going to be hired by, for a more senior position. So let's start something together. So when we were trying to figure out what it would be, like, would it be marketing? Would it be some sort of other sports field working with athletes? We're like, no, like, well, what are we most passionate about? And for both she and I, it was philanthropy, charitable giving, making an impact. So we said we can combine the two. We can combine sports with giving back and have sports philanthropy. So that's how we got started there.
So it's cool to hear, that you were searching all along for this kind of passion element to be found, and you found it. You also mentioned at one point, when you were talking about being in law school and recognizing that that path kind of maybe, or that straightforward path wasn't for you, that you recognized that your skill set was maybe a little different, or you were starting to recognize your skill set. What were some of the things that you noticed in yourself at that point?
I'm a people person. A lot of lawyers are not people, are not people. They're more, like they're. I mean, that's part of being a lawyer, right? Like you need to know the letter of the law, and that's what it is, And there's not a lot of fluff that goes along with being a lawyer. And not to say that I'm like a fluffy personality, but I'm highly empathetic, and I like that extra piece that's involved. Um, and I'm able to look, and probably just from my upbringing, but I'm able to look at things from a lot of different viewpoints, and able to really work with people on different levels. My undergrad degree is in sociology, so I'm really able to take in those skills to and just see where other people are coming from. And in law, they teach you you have to be able to argue both sides. And I definitely am able to do that, but I'm also able to actually feel both sides, So it's more than just being able to argue both sides because that's what you're supposed to do as a lawyer or be able to do. I'm actually able to look at things from different angles. So I feel like those are skills that serve me well now, but definitely were skills that I saw and began to develop even more in law school.
So you decide to start this business together. Tell us what happens then. How does that go?
So we're both working full time when we started, and I was I worked a lot of hours at the time. I was definitely working a lot. My business partner had a decent commute, a pretty long commute to her job, and I just was working a lot. So the idea of starting something when we're both pretty busy, it seemed like, you know, this is not the right time. But then we also said, if we don't start now, when will we start? We both have been out of school for so long by this point. So we dug our heels in and we started. I said the best thing to do is just to get going, because if you get going and you have everything up and running, it's hard. It's harder to stop as opposed to having the idea. Because I had over the years, this is when we started, it was 6 years out of law school for me. So over that time, I had lots of different ideas. Some I tried to follow through with, some I didn't. But I knew that the more momentum you put behind an idea, the more likely you are to continue it. And that's what we did. We just went full steam ahead. And in fact, we were fortunate because while we were still building the company, like we had worked on our business plan. We didn't have a website up, we didn't have a logo, we just had a name, a business plan, and a marketing plan. I had a conversation with a former law school colleague and told her what we were planning on doing, and she's like, "Oh, I have the perfect person for you to meet." So she does an introduction, and they had someone who had a need for the exact thing that we were doing.
Mm.
So in my head, I'm like, no, wait, we don't have a website. Like we don't have business cards. Like, please, no. We were still using Gmail at the time. Like, please, we're not ready. But I knew just from the company that I started after law school how difficult it was to get your first athlete client. So I said, we have to at least keep going. Like, we can't wait until everything is up and running because we may not get this opportunity again. So luckily we did, and we kind of kept building as we had our first client or as we were entertained. And then from there, It's a referral business. So we got another client shortly thereafter. So, you know, we are both still working full time and both still very busy with our day jobs, but we have, a business in the background. So at a certain point, we had to say, okay, um, we this is what we're most passionate about. This is what we went to school for. This is what we've dreamed of. Why are we still working our full time jobs when we're actually doing what we dreamed about doing?
And was that a sudden realization, or did you have a goal that if we meet this mark, we'll step back?
It was sometimes it would be nice to say that we chose this on our own, but for both my business partner and I, we were kind of like forced into the situation. She actually ended up resigning from her job. I think she would have resigned, if even if she hadn't, even if we didn't have the company. It just was time for her to move on. So she did that, and for me, I needed more of a push. I had a very comfortable job. I had a boss that I admired and loved working with, a great office. I had that dream office that I wanted everything that I wanted as a little girl. I had, I had the office that I loved with the view. I had a good salary, and I had to say. So it took literally me being pushed to say, wait a second, this is what you thought you wanted as a kid, but which you are actually really passionate about right now as an adult, you have the opportunity to pursue more. So it was just like a perfect storm of things that forced me to 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 go quit and to resign, actually, and work on the business full time.
I'm sure we have listeners that can relate to that. I know I can. And so, it must have been harder. I think that's implicit. What was sorry, let me back up. It must have been harder that you enjoyed what you were doing as compared to knowing there were signs that you should move on externally. What was that internal struggle like and leading you to being
It was
able to do that?
Yeah, it was difficult. And then again, I mean, I bring my mom in a lot, but it was a conversation I had with my mom. I was like, I need a sign from God that this is what I'm supposed to do. And like the sign, like we were renting a condo, and the land, my landlord, I'd been there for 4 years, and he's like, I need to move back. And I was like, wait, no, this was just your investment property. What do you mean you need to move in? He's like, my fiance wants us to move here, and I'm sorry, but I need the place back. And I'm like, so it's like, okay, I'm losing the place. I had begun having more of a tenuous relationship with my boss, and we had so many years of smooth sailing, and things were and it could be because like my attention, I made sure that my focus at work was work, and then after work and before work was focused on the business. So I wasn't as available as I used to be. Like I would work Monday through Sunday. And now I just didn't have the opportunity. I could show up completely at work, but on the weekends, I just needed to focus on the business. And like, I could stay until 8 o'clock, but I can't stay until 9 or 10 o'clock anymore. Like it just, so like the relationship changed between us. So it wasn't the same. So I had issues with, friendships that I had had for years. I was having, this was all while in LA. So part of the resigning also meant moving across the country and coming back to New York. So it was the internal struggle was like, I am giving up everything. Like, yes, things are not great right now at this moment, but I've had years of a life in LA that I loved. Um, why am I giving up health benefits and a salary and stability to move back across the country and work on a business that you know is working right now, but who knows what'll happen. So there was a lot of internal struggle.
So you make the move. What happens after that?
I made the move. The photo that represents my journey it's a winding road because that's what the path was after law school. It was a winding road. It was a lot of ups and downs and curves, and that's what it was coming back. I had lived in LA for 6 years. I went after a few months after I graduated law school. I had created a life out there, and it was a comfortable life. Um, but putting everything aside and moving back to New York and starting over basically, but with this new business, uh, it was exciting. Kind of like a road like that could be exciting, but it was terrifying because you don't know what's going to come out. You don't know if you're going to be able to stay on the road successfully. So I think that's the best way to describe it, and it most best describes the journey. A lot of bumps, a lot of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of turning points. But in the end, I'm happy with the destination. I mean, I'm still on the road, but I'm happy with the view. It's a great view.
And
What
so,
are, sorry, go ahead, Kevin. No, you go
no,
ahead.
I was just curious. So, did the thoughts of generating additional clients become more prominent once you've made the move?
Absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
consuming.
Yeah. Because it's like at this point, well, we're both in the business full time. So, it's a lot of work. I mean, we're busy, but we're like, we need to be able to sustain the business and sustain ourselves. And, you know, not having the full time job definitely created an urgency to say, okay, we need to go back to square one and figure out how to make this grow and how to make this to be out there more because we didn't have to be out there a lot while we were working full time because we had our clients, like we could just focus on our clients, and like that's really all we had time to do. um, but when it was like we're both in the company full time, we need to have more brand awareness, we need to do more business development, and that's what happened.
So what does a kind of a day in the life of in your business look like?
So different every day. So I talked in the beginning about we're a consulting firm. But last 2018, we started doing more events. So we began about 50% of our business was consulting, and 50% was with events. So if we have an event going on, it's like completely different because the consulting doesn't stop. Like we still have to, our focus is still on the clients, but an event, there's a lot that goes into an event. Working to secure the speakers, and working with sponsors and trying to get sponsors, and making sure that people actually show up to the event. you know um, but our event series have been popular and have been great for us. We really love the events that we put on. So if we have an event going on, obviously everything is all over the place, but when uh, there isn't an event, their focus really is just on our clients, um, fully, and on business development.
What are some of the things you find easy versus challenging?
I find coming up coming up with ideas is the easy part for me. Like I have a lot of ideas. They come constantly. So that's the easy part. Sometimes finding clients to go with those ideas. Like I'm like, hey guys, like come because I have all these ideas I would love to give to you. um you know Getting new clients is difficult. We're in an industry where it's not easy to work with professional athletes. We were very fortunate with how we got our first client, but that's like the hardest part is getting the first client, because I got to learn more about professional athletes during the time that I'm working with them, and it's very difficult in terms of who you can trust. What people promising a lot and delivering not a lot. So really, it just making sure that we stand out and we somehow are able to convey that we're different. We're different, because we're not doing this because we wanted to work with athletes. We're doing this because there's a lot of change that we would love to see. And we are able to use athletes to use their platform and their resources and their celebrity to make changes. So that's our goal and that's our mission. If we weren't working with professional athletes and we were independently wealthy, we would just be doing it on our own, And if we had our own celebrity, we would just be doing it on our own. But we know that athletes and other influencers have like such a great platform, that that's what we're doing. So
And I've noticed in the music industry, you mentioned people that it's that first client is always the hardest. And what I've noticed in reaching out for this project and others is oftentimes people want to know um, the other folks you've worked with. Have you noticed that in your industry?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the idea is, well, if they trust you, even if they don't know the person, it's like, well, if they trust you, then I guess you're trustworthy. So, it definitely helps. And I've seen that 100% with both the athletes and the people who represent the athletes, because they uh, they're, I mean, in any industry, but like, with sports and entertainment, there are just more vultures than there are in other industries.
Sure.
And if you're approaching being in the sports industry because you're a fan, that doesn't work because there are a million fans out there. So I think that part helps too. I am a fan of the game, like I'm definitely a fan of sports, but I'm not a fan of, like, I'm not like a super fan when it comes to athletes. There are a few that I would, but in general, like, I'm looking at athletes as people, which they are. So that definitely helps.
Makes a lot of sense. And I've noticed it's they almost want that safe space where they don't have to worry that you're just doing that because you are a fan, because obviously, as you pointed out, they get enough of that already, so they don't need to pay for it or bring someone in that's going to do that. So
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've had to make any sacrifices along the way in your journey?
Yes. You know, healthcare for a little while. Um, uh, no, I miss having benefits. Feel like that was a really great thing, to have those, have good benefits. But no, just being a business owner, I think more so than anything else, is already difficult. But being a business owner in the sports industry, where it's a year-round cycle,
Mm.
because most of our clients are in the basketball space. So it's not just busy during the season, but it's also busy off season because then that's when a lot of the charitable events would take place. So there is not really a downtime. Like there's not a sweet spot, especially if you have clients in different sports, because their cycles are different. So then it's just 12 months worth of being on. Um, so I mean, I've sacrificed time with my family. I've sacrificed, different things, but I b- tried to make sure that I incorporated things that I loved as much as possible. So even if it meant, flying from one place and making a pit stop and visiting family during a long layover and then keep going. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, I obviously all this is pre-COVID, but I tried to, I traveled a lot. So I tried to make sure I can incorporate spending time with my family as much as I could. And even if it was just for a few hours, like to me, that was, it was a sacrifice. Or if I'm there, I'm not 100% fully present, but I'm still there.
Mhm.
And that was important for me.
and what do you consider to be the keys to your success?
My faith. My business partner and I, we founded our company on our faith. We that was something was it was a leap of faith to do it in the first place, to like have the audacity to say, okay, after all these years, like we can do this. So it just took a lot of prayer for us, and a lot of faithfulness to say, and it's a constant thing,
Mhm.
but to say that we can do this, and that it can work.
Have there been any times where you've really felt that maybe lack of surety or lack of faith in what the future is going to hold?
Uh, every day, I'd say. That's why I said it's very active. It has to be very active faith. You know, they're just so you just don't know. You just never know. Like there, you never know what's going to happen. You never know if you're going to be able to get another client. You never know if the whole thing is going to be like the rug is going to come out from underneath you. Um, we're proud of what we built and we're proud of the work that we do. But we do know that it is a very competitive industry. I mean, we have a very small carved out space in the sports industry. Like it's not oversaturated at all. Um, but it's catching on. And, there are a lot of people who have experience in the charitable space and also have experience in the sports space who say, wait, I should combine this. I should do that exact same thing. Um, so there's a lot of that struggle of like, are we doing enough? Do we have enough clients? Like, do we have enough brand awareness? I think when the pandemic hit was a huge a jolt in our faith.
Yeah.
It was difficult because the sport all of a sudden, I remember the day very clearly, sports stopped.
Mm.
Once the NBA stopped, I knew everything else was going to follow. I remember I had the FSU. I actually had the FSU game on, and when I saw it, I'm like, okay, like we're not. There's not going to be March Madness. Like this is not going to
Yeah.
happen. And I remember watching the players and just thinking like, what is going to happen for our business if there are no sports, right? Like if there are no sports, how can we have a sports business? So that
And
part was
events too, right? I mean, you're in kind of two industries that were hard hit. And I was just
yeah.
going to ask you about that. Tell us a little bit what it's been like to try and think about how to navigate this time.
Yeah, the first few weeks were very difficult because no one had any answers. I remember having conversations with my business partner every day and the same thing. It's like we kept every we would begin a topic and then we would say, well, we don't know because we didn't know. It was so hard to make a plan and we
Hmm.
were so sick of saying we don't know. So we just stopped talking for a couple of days. A couple of days we were just like, you know what, let's just stop because we don't know.
Yeah.
And this is like it's futile like for us to keep having these conversations. Um, so I think that was very difficult. But then at a certain point, it's like, okay, we've weathered other storms before. Obviously, this is like a storm like nothing we've ever encountered. But let's figure out a way to make this work. Let's figure out a way to pivot. And in the beginning, a lot of difficulty around what could be done on a charitable side
Mhm.
because it was so new and there were so many questions as to what was needed and how to deliver it and what can be, short of just giving money, how could people make an impact on the charitable side. So then as the weeks progressed, it became more clear that there were other things that could be done. But in the beginning, we just weren't sure. We didn't know what it would look like.
And this is kind of a off topic based on what we've been talking about, but for some reason, when you mentioned some of that, it made me think: are there commonalities you've identified among your clients or professional athletes or other high performers? Do you see anything across the board that they share? Any characteristics that have made them successful in their own right?
Yeah, I think there's a drive that athletes, professional or otherwise, have that you know that I draw on because I'm not an athlete myself. So I look at the that they all have this strain of no matter what, I'm going to make it happen. So I try to bring that into my business practice because it's not innate because it's innate in other ways, but it's a different. Athletes definitely just have a different drive and a different motivation that it's like no matter what, I'm going to make it work. You watch athletes play through pain or fight through injuries at rates that other people can't because it's that underlying drive of I have to believe in myself and I have to make it happen. So I try to bring that into our business.
What have you learned about yourself throughout your own journey?
That you know, before we started this particular company, because there had been so many winding roads, I had to keep believing that it was all going to work out. It didn't seem like it was going to work out. It didn't seem like I was ever going to get back to the into sports. It didn't seem like, it didn't seem like my real dreams would ever come true. So I lived with that for a while. But I kept, I just kept living. And I think starting the company, I realized, and then everything that comes along with working in the sports industry, I realized it was a fight that I had. Like, even though I didn't know if it was going to work, I never gave up in the back of my head, and I think that helped.
So, what advice would you give someone who, I guess we could look at this question a lot of ways, going into law, starting their own business, working in the sport kind of philanthropy space?
The biggest advice is that whole, I mean, it sounds so cliche, but you just have to believe in yourself. Like, you have to, you don't have to, but if you want to keep going, you should believe in yourself, or you should at least try. And you can't always do it on your own. Like you need to sometimes reach out to people and have them remind you of what you've done. I think that's a really big piece of advice, because, when I am having those moments, and usually it's my mom I reach out to, she likes to remind me of what I've already accomplished. And she's like, remember this, remember that, remember when this wasn't working and you kept going, so having that either internal voice or having someone who can remind you of how you persevered in the past, and how things might have looked really dismal and they ended up working out, it helps you keep going. So, like, I try to do that on my own now a lot. I just try to say, okay, um, think back. Think back when you didn't think this was going to work, and then it ended up working.
Kudos to mom. um, and so I'm sure you're familiar with the term imposter syndrome. Whether there's ever a time, either in law school or later on with your business ventures, that you yourself felt like you might be faking it till you made it, or just faking it in general.
So I went to an elite. I hate using the word elite, but it was an elite private school, New England private school, and I started in eighth grade through high school. So I got rid of the imposter syndrome there, because that's the place where I really should have had the imposter syndrome. I came from, a middle class public school that was, it was a middle class public school, to an elite private New England private school, with people that, whose parents were doing things that I could never imagine, like, just very, very influential people. Um, and I thrived there. Was able to go. I made lifelong friends. I was very, very involved from the moment I got there. So I think I got rid of feeling like an imposter at a very early age, because somehow I made it work and I fit into a place where I really shouldn't have fit in.
Mhm.
So I'm able to bring like, nothing. Everything else has been downhill since then. Like, that was, I think, the peak, especially at a time when you're a kid and trying to figure things out. Like, that was the peak place where I was able to just get rid of I didn't belong.
It's amazing. 'Cause I'm a serial public school kid, and so I don't know how many people I've told this before, but I guess at least the number of listeners will know this now. But it was like my third year of grad school PhD program. I was still afraid my mentor would come in and say, "We made a mistake. We let you in. What are you doing here? Just go home." And so it was finally, after I finished the program, I kind of gotten rid of most of it, uh, at least surrounding my academic capabilities. So that's awesome that you had that experience early enough that it kind of solidified the rest of your career. That's good.
Thank you. Now, I will say, coming into the sports industry, I think my biggest feeling of being an imposter was that I didn't work in the sports industry like everyone else. If you hear I work in the sports industry, your career, you were either at a team or a league or a large brand. Like that's what it means to work in the sports industry. So the imposter that I sometimes feel is that I don't work in the sports industry. And I have to remind myself, you work with professional athletes. You've been
Mhm.
doing this for 3 years now. You work in the sports industry. But like there are times where I definitely take a step back and I'm like, well, I don't really work in the sports industry just because I don't have that traditional path of working at a team league or, at a sports brand.
Sure, makes sense. So Kevin and I met in grad school, studying expert performance. His advisor is Anders Ericsson, who's a world-renowned expert on expertise. And so we've always had, since that time, an immense interest and around the idea of how do you develop expertise, and how does that become possible, and it really stems from the nature nurture debate of where are we on the one very far end of the continuum, we're born with everything we need, and then on the other end of the continuum, we make it happen, or life makes it happen. So if you consider that dynamic, what would you attribute to nature versus nurture?
I think it's a happy medium. I don't know if it's like this for everyone, but I definitely think that there's certain things that you're just born with, but there's other things that have to be that have to be nurtured. But then there's other things that just come from what you put into it. So I'm definitely like I think it's a middle of the road there because I think even in my own life, I've seen it just the two converge. There was a lot in me before I went to that school that I had just mentioned in eighth grade, but like a lot that I learned there that I was able to make me into who I am and carry that still to this day.
Is there anything that we haven't asked you about yet that you feel is important for the listeners to know?
I think one thing that I didn't mention when I was talking about the winding path that's really important to keep in mind is that no experience is wasted. And I think sometimes when you're in those experiences, you feel like they're wasted experiences, and you can't see how they would fit into the puzzle. But during that journey between law school and eventually co-founding Champions for Philanthropy, there were a lot of experiences that I had and jobs that I had that I just couldn't understand how they would fit into the puzzle. It's because I didn't understand the puzzle. I didn't know what the end was going to be. So now that I'm further along, I'm able to look back and say, okay, all of those pieces fit. And like I needed those experiences to go with where I am here now. And I needed those skills that I developed during that time. So yeah, I think that's something really important to leave with everyone is no matter where you are right now, no matter what you're going through, that you are going to be able to look back later and use skills and experience and draw from experiences later on in life.
Now that you've started Champions for Philanthropy and have been doing it for a few years, do you feel like you now see the puzzle a bit more, or is it still like, I wonder how this puzzle's going to turn out?
I think I am well versed enough now to know. Let me just keep going because I know that who knows how the puzzle. I thought I would always think that these were how things were gonna lay out, and it was gonna be this perfect. I definitely had an idea of like the perfect life and what it would look like, and I think now I'm just a little bit more trusting and saying, let me just keep going with the flow and see what happens.
What's it like doing that? Because you started your story kind of saying, you had this goal in mind and you were full force trying to go towards that. And now it sounds like you're trying to just follow things along a bit. What's that
It's difficult. COVID is teaching me like
like?
this pandemic has shown me all that I'm a controlling person. Like I'm controlling in every aspect of my life. That sometimes you're just not in control, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you just have to go with the flow. And I'm not a go with the flow kind of person. Everyone in my life could tell you that. But I think this pandemic has been a great example for me that you have to go with the flow because I cannot plan anything, and I haven't been able to plan anything both professionally and business wise. I can, have an idea of something I want to do, and definitely you can make, have a high level picture, but I have to adjust, and I've had to adjust. So
We've had the same experience. Even the stuff that's being postponed into 2021, we're not certain how that's going to play out. So
yeah,
it's,
I just think it's fascinating too, because on the one hand, I think it's like you said, it's you have to learn this kind of art of acceptance, right? And the fact that you can't control everything. But on the other hand, at least for me, and I'm curious to your thoughts, sometimes I'm like, but don't let go of like that drive you have and all that. Like just you can't completely lose that because that's partly what got you here. So
yeah.
it's this kind of wrestling of like, I've got to accept, but I also am scared of letting go of that drive.
It's such a delicate balance because, like you said, it's easy. I mean, there in the beginning, it's definitely easy to slip into the other side, and where you're just like, I'm gonna completely let go. Whatever is gonna happen is going to happen. And like, I had 2 full weeks of Netflix binges, and I that because I'm like, whatever's gonna happen is going to happen. Like, I clearly can't control anything anymore. But then I had the awakening, like, okay, you might not be able to control things exactly the way you want to, but you still need to have that drive. You still need to be making plans, and you just accept that they may change, but you still have to develop them, and you still have to keep that drive there. So it's definitely a slippery slope.
For sure.
what's the biggest takeaway from your story?
Keep going. I think that's the biggest thing. Keep, keep going because even when I had the position that I had before I resigned to start my company here, I really could have stayed. I would have been a lifelong employee there because I mean I was in a great position and it didn't make sense necessarily to rock the boat and leave that. And don't be afraid to take a leap because I moved back across the country, uh, and I was afraid to take that leap because I didn't. I mean, how would that look? Like I had given up my life to move to LA. Like how would it look to move back from LA to New York? Like what would people think? And what did this mean about me and my capabilities and my you know um, so you have to really black out a lot of the outside noise, even if sometimes the noise you think there's going to be noise and there's really not. It's just your the own noise that you have in your head. Um, but it's really important to just do what's best for you. So I've done that in my life, my business life, my personal life. Like to really just do what's best for you. Take a leap, trust, and for me, it's pray.
And have a good mom in your
That helps.
ear.
And I do have a quick follow-up question. Did it take you time or practice to start listening more to yourself for those inner voices?
Yeah. Yeah, and to the right ones, because I mean, I definitely listen to a lot of the inner voices that would say like, "You can't do this. Like, who do you think you are? Like, this is not going to work. Like, remember when you tried? Remember when you tried the lifestyle management brand and it didn't work? Like, why do you think this one would?" So really, just listening to the right ones, and just getting in tune. And for some people, that's through yoga and meditation, or some people it's through running or biking, and being active. So just really figuring out how you best hear the voice. For me it's the beach. Like I can I can center myself and get it's a lot harder moving to the back to New
I was
York.
gonna say you had an easier access to it on the other coast.
Yeah. I definitely made it more difficult for myself to hear that. But yeah, it really helps to get in tune and say like what what is best for me, what am I hearing for myself.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Alycia, for sharing your story and for coming on the show today. We really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you both, and keep up the amazing work. I think it's great what you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. The Path Distilled is hosted by Kevin Harris and Lauren Tashman, created and produced by Kevin Harris. The content is copyrighted by The Path Distilled, all rights reserved.